I'm Harry Reasoner. Good evening again for myself and for Howard K. Smith and Barbara Walters. We are now well into this election night. It is very close. At the moment, with a popular vote, 51% of the precincts in the country have reported. Jimmy Carter is holding a 51 to 48% lead, which has been about the way it's gone for the last 2 or 3 hours. We now have a new projection, though, that is of importance and encouragement to the President Ford's forces. His home state of Michigan is projected by ABC News to go to Gerald Ford by a very close margin, giving him 21 electoral votes. The Michigan popular vote at the moment, Jimmy Carter is still ahead, 51 to 48%, but that's a margin that has been shrinking very steadily, and we project that eventually the state will go to Ford. Barbara?
Some more good news for Ford. His second home is Colorado because of Vail, where he has a condominium, and Colorado has gone to Ford by a close margin, and that was a state that was very close. It only has 7 electoral votes. Well, that's not bad, but if you add up a whole bunch of those electoral votes, you can really begin to sway things. So it's good news for Ford that he is Colorado.
And that leaves the electoral vote total at the moment, as according to ABC's state projections, with 270 needed. Jimmy Carter has 197, Gerald Ford 113. We'd like to take a look now at some important gubernatorial races, and for that we'll go to Ann Compton.
Harry, we have a call now for the first woman for the evening to win a statewide race in the state of Washington. ABC News is projecting that Dixie Lee Ray, the Democratic candidate, a novice to politics, beating John Spellman, a local county executive in the Seattle area, Dixie Lee Ray by a comfortable margin. She is a newcomer to politics, ran a somewhat unorthodox campaign, running as an outsider and a non-politician getting the nomination, but during the regular campaign, she called in for help from many of the establishment Democrats in the state. Another ABC projection in the state of Utah. This time, another Democrat making it a clean sweep of the western states for the Democrats this evening. Scott Matheson, a railroad lawyer, defeating coming from behind in the polls, as a matter of fact, to take the governorship of Utah, following behind the incumbent Calvin Rampton, who did not seek re-election. Scott Matheson with now about 54% of the vote over Vernon Romney, a distant relative of not only Governor George Romney, but some high officials in the Mormon Church. Scott Matheson, a railroad lawyer, now the new governor of Utah. And ABC News is projecting in Montana the incumbent Thomas Judge will be winning. There was something of a local scandal in the state of Montana. Judge overcame Republican opposition. So those are 3 states where the Democrats have come out on top in the western end of the state, of the country. Some Senate results from Frank Reynolds.
Yes, Ann, and we have one that I think is probably going to be a bit surprising to a good many people. In the state of Wyoming, there is going to be a new United States Senator, according to ABC News projection at this time. Malcolm Wallop, the Republican challenger, is going to be the victor when all the votes are counted. Wallop is 43 years old. He's a rancher. He also happens to be a Yale man, and he was born in New York. An interesting thing about him is that he has proposed that senators be limited to 2 terms. Might be interesting to see 12 years from now how he feels about that. He's defeated a longtime power in the Senate, Gale McGee of Wyoming, who was trying for his 4th term. McGee was the chairman of the Post Office and Civil Service Committee, and the challenger, Mr. Wallop, got around to blaming McGee for poor mail service in the state of Wyoming, and apparently that was one of the factors that may have contributed to his defeat. So there's an incumbent who was a real power in the Senate in terms of longevity and chairmanship of some powerful committees, and Gale McGee has gone down to defeat, according to our projection, Senator-elect Malcolm Wallop. A Republican from Wyoming will take his place in the Senate. That's it for the Senate right now. I'm sorry, Barbara?
Barbara, I consider that to be a real upset, the McGee defeat. He was defeated by a man named Malcolm Wallop, who likes to be shown riding horseback, a real Westerner, yet he was born in New York City of British parents. He's an emigre to McGee's territory.
He sounds like an athletic renaissance man.
Nothing but a dial tone.
Even at this point, things are very close, obviously, but there are still some states where we are just much too close to make any kind of a projection, even in the South, where so many of the states have already gone for Jimmy Carter, for example. Mississippi with 7 electoral votes. We still don't know what that's going to be, and 55% of the precincts have already reported. Carter is ahead of Ford by only 3%, 51% to 48%. As we go out west, for example, New Mexico, and people take a look at that state, for many reasons, one of which is it's voted for a winner since it entered the Union in 1912, and New Mexico at 67% of the precincts reporting, Ford 52 to Carter 48%. Oklahoma's another state much too close to call still with 97% of the precincts in. It's Ford 58 to Carter 49, and McCarthy, as you can see, with just 1%. So there's still lots of states coming in and still perhaps some surprises.
We've got 3 among the states I'm keeping track of that could almost end the election one way or another. My original home state of Iowa now has reported 72% of its precincts, by which time you would assume you could get a result, and it stays 49% to 49%. Gerald Ford with a little bit higher 49% than Carter's 49%. And McCarthy, the 2% there, may be making the difference. In Wisconsin, 37% of the precincts in. Carter ahead 53% to 45%, but it is from areas that makes the state as a whole too close to call. In Texas, it remains Carter 51%, Ford 48%, with 65% of the precincts in Texas. Those 3 states could make an awful lot of difference. We've got a man standing by in Los Angeles who has campaigned for Jimmy Carter, even though he campaigned against him in the primaries, and who may have something to say about the very important state of California. Governor Jerry Brown is out there. Good evening, Governor.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Have you figured out 35 minutes after the polls close how California is going to go?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised if it followed the national trend. I think the country follows a certain mood, and Jimmy Carter has been able to project the sense of leadership, the obvious fact that government has to take the lead, and yet at the same time I think he's been prudent in terms of fiscal matters, and the people have been responding to it, at least as far as I can see.
What's your guess, Governor Brown, as to what happened to Jimmy Carter's overwhelming lead after the Democratic convention? How was it dissipated?
Well, when I look tonight, it looks to me in fairly good shape. The large numbers that we saw very early in the season, I don't think you can take too seriously. Ford hadn't been nominated. The exposure of the last 45 days hadn't occurred. And as things come together, people tend to follow their own particular political party. It tends to narrow down. But I'm very impressed that when we add together the South and looking at some of the industrial states, that a Democrat, Jimmy Carter, is doing quite well.
But in California, Governor, don't you put any credence in the last field poll, which gave Ford a 6% lead in California?
Well, there's so many polls that I don't keep up with them, really. There's the Corey poll, and Pat Caddell has his polls, and Field has his. I think it comes down to a question of what the voters are looking for. And with Gerald Ford, there was really a request to just keep things the way they were. There was no sense of the future, no possibility, and no opening to new directions. And Jimmy Carter, with his commitment and his activism and his Democratic constituency, I think when you cut away all the commercials and all the talk, it comes down to a question of trying something new, of looking to the future, and using government to solve a number of the problems that are affecting us as a people.
Governor, at this point, with just 3% of the precincts in California reporting in, we have that Ford has 53% to Carter's 47%. Obviously, it's too soon to know. But from your own material you're receiving there, the northern part of the state usually goes Democratic and the southern part of the state usually goes Republican. Does that seem to be holding up as in past pictures?
Well, I wouldn't, that's often been said, but the early returns are absentee votes that are traditionally Republican. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Jimmy Carter carrying California, because I think this state responds in the same way that some of the other states would. Pennsylvania, Illinois, some of the eastern states. We're concerned about the environment. Ford had very little to say about that. Jimmy Carter a great deal to say. Governor Carter talked a great deal about nuclear proliferation. And up until the last week of the campaign, Gerald Ford had almost nothing to say about that. So I think people are looking for hope. They're looking for the future. And on almost each of the significant turning issues employment, environment, energy, and in the matter of confidence in government, Jimmy Carter was presenting a case that more people could identify with.
Governor, when you were campaigning in the primaries against Governor Carter, there wasn't very much good feeling between the two of you, but then you didn't know each other very well. Well, now you...
I really wouldn't describe it that way. I was an opponent. I tried to set the case as I saw it. And as far as feelings go, when you run against somebody, you try to make your best case, and I think Jimmy Carter made his. So I think that was rather exaggerated by the necessity of making these differences appear greater than they sometimes are.
Well, how do you feel about him now that you have been with him on a personal level? Do you feel close? Do you consider yourself friends, or is it a good democratic political relationship? How would you describe it?
I think it's a good relationship. I'm impressed, certainly the last day when the Gallup poll came out and that incident in Plains, I was very impressed by Governor Carter's ability to take it all with a degree of equanimity and calm that will serve him very well in the troubled waters of the White House that I think he's going to find himself in.
Governor,
so I was very impressed with that the last day.
If Carter wins and stays in office 8 years, you will still be a very young man when he's out. Do you
Someone
have
said I'll be younger than Gerald Ford is now in 1994, so I'm not in any great hurry.
Well, thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you, Governor. Coming up next, more of our continuous election coverage right after this. Well, it's 11:45 on the East Coast. 54% of the nation's precincts have had their votes counted. And in that popular vote, Jimmy Carter continues to hold a 51 to 48% lead. There are still some states that are too close to call that could make it go either way. Lou Harris has been watching not only the votes as they came in, but the reports from his and ABC's own national model. Lou, what's your report at the moment?
Harry, we find with 2/3 of the national model vote in that 3-point Carter lead seems to hold. Now, we have some very interesting analysis here of some of the key groups in the population who voted very differently tonight from the way they have in the past. First, two that didn't. The black vote now is firmed up to an 81 to 17-point Carter lead. That is substantial. They didn't turn out in bigger numbers, but gave him a very handsome majority. The Spanish-speaking, 70 to 29%, a very big lead indeed. However, among white Catholics, we find that Ford is ahead 50 to 49%, and that's a big setback for Jimmy Carter. He just somehow never sold himself to the white Catholic group. An interesting one, and we've now got nearly all of the Jewish precincts in, our count shows 54 to 44% for Jimmy Carter. That is not a good showing by any standard here. But then he reverses it by being the first Democratic candidate, I'd guess in about 30 years, except, well, maybe Lyndon Johnson in his landslide, to be ahead with the white Protestant vote, 48 to 46%. That's the biggest surprise to me, and when we trace it down, you can see that it comes down to the white Baptist group, Jimmy Carter's own religious group, going for him 57 to 43%. That's interesting because in 1972, Richard Nixon took that vote by 3 to 1, white Baptists. So there was a religious issue working here, and one working very strongly for Jimmy Carter. In fact, I'd say that if you didn't have this turnaround of Carter making up all the ground lost among Catholics and Jews by getting a huge majority, a 14-point majority with white Baptists tonight, he'd have been in deep trouble.
Thank you, Lou.
Harry?
Thank you. There was an interesting answer the other day, that question that got Jimmy Carter in trouble in Playboy about lusting in your heart. There was a candidate in California who said he lusted after women in his heart every hour on the hour, but because he was so busy campaigning, he would have to settle for that. That's SI Hawaka, the unusual senatorial candidate who is right now, I believe, with Bill Redeker in Los Angeles.
I'll just bring that again. He's already quoted me.
That's correct, Harry. Dr. Hayakawa, you are somewhat of a political phenomenon in this state. This is the first time you have run for elective office, and the California poll last week placed you within 2 percentage points of incumbent John Tunney. Why are you so popular? Why are you so well received?
Well, I have a reputation from outside the political area altogether through my writings, my lecturing, my textbooks that people have been studying in school for 35 years, my newspaper columns, and also my work as president at San Francisco State College, which received a large amount of notoriety.
And that was your opposition at that time, I believe, 8 years ago, to campus radicals, was it not?
Yes, it was, uh-huh.
You are 70 years old, and that has been used against you politically. How do you respond to the criticism that because of your age you cannot make the traditional claim that you'll serve for many terms and accumulate seniority that would benefit California?
Well, there are several answers to that. The first is that very few senators going for the first time go in with an already established national reputation in another field, so that in a sense that there isn't the need to establish a lot of seniority in order to get heard. But another answer I've often liked to give is that I could serve 3 terms, not only be 88 when I'm finished, and my mother's alive and well and in full possession of her faculties at the age of 92.
92?
Yes.
Your stand on various issues has sort of defied categorization. In some cases, you've admitted you had no ideas whatsoever. Is that still the case?
Well, I'm sure it's still the case for people who've served in the Senate for a long, long time. But after a few years of practice in public oratory, you learn how to conceal your ignorance very, very well. But I haven't learned to do that yet.
There is a heavy voter turnout in Southern California. Will that help you or the incumbent?
I think it'll help me very, very much, because something like 35% or more of Democrats are voting for me. Then if I get a full Republican turnout too, then by gosh, I got it made.
Dr. Hayakawa, thank you very much. Back to New York and Barbara Walters.
Thank you, Dr. Hayakawa. With 64% of the key precincts in California reporting, it's still a 50-50 split, much too early to call. And coming up next, we'll have more continuous election coverage right after this.
Well, coming up next, more of our continuous election coverage right after this.
Well, as projected results go, this one is rather sensational. The 3rd most populous state, Pennsylvania, ABC News projects it will go to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter takes the 3rd most populous state after having taken the 2nd most populous one in New York City. And that is the national election story at 52 minutes after the hour.